Okay, I'm recording now. This is the assignment we're doing, the Early Middle Ages and Beowulf assignment. Early Middle Ages reading page 1 to 8 for notes. So if I open that up, it shows two attachments. One is going to be the reading, and the other is going to be a note sheet. I'm going to ask you to open the reading, do the reading, and fill out the note sheet. Make sure that when you fill out the note sheet, even if you listen to me talk, even if you talk to each other and help each other out, do not copy exactly the same as somebody else is writing. So don't let anyone get a copy of yours and then just copy it, and don't get someone else's work and just copy it. I don't expect the answers to be the same. Oftentimes they're similar, but it's very rare for answers to be exactly the same unless they are exactly copied. So you may talk to each other and you may listen to me, but then write your own answers. So what you're going to do is you're going to open the Middle Ages packet. I'm going to open mine in Cami so that I can write on it. You may too if you'd like. You may write on yours, but you do not need to. Okay, I'm going to turn on the comment function, because that way when I highlight something, it'll give me a chance to write a little something in the margin. And that's the way I'm going to do my notes. All right, so we are reading about the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages go from 449 to 1485. Obviously, the historians have decided those are the dates that they want to go with, but they decided that after the fact. It's not like, when 448 turned to 449, all of a sudden people started to think differently. The historians went back and just noticed a pattern. So they established those as the dates. This is a picture of a mask, the kind of shield that you would wear if you were in battle, to cover your face to get from injured, to keep yourself from being injured. But of course, this one is pretty decorative, and it's old. Of course, that's why it looks scrappy. Okay, the first section that we're going to read about is the Anglo-Saxon period. Okay, you have heard of Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon, why is this not highlighting? That was interesting. Oh, because it's a PDF, so it's not highlighting. Okay, so I'm going to put it in like this. Just a dot, there it is. You've heard of Anglo-Saxon and you've heard of Anglos. You've heard that expression for whites. Okay, so this is going back to the time when the Anglo-Saxons started. All right, they started what they called the Germanic invasions. And I'm just going to read. Very little is known about the Britons, a Celtic people who were the original inhabitants of Britain. They were conquered by the Romans in the 1st century AD and became a part of the Roman Empire. Evidence of this occupation exists in familiar place names ending in Castor or Chester, a local version of the Latin word for camp, castra. Around the year 410, when the Roman legions were required at home to protect the capital, the peoples of Britain were left unprotected and fell prey to raiding and looting from their neighbors on the continent. Okay, so this is what happened when the Romans left. It left the people susceptible to attacks. And what happened is roving tribes from all over, saw this island and decided to attack it. and steal and do all that good stuff. According to tradition, it was 449 that the first band of people from the great North German plain crossed the North Sea to Britain and settled in what is now the county of Kent. They were the Jutes from the peninsula of Jutland in Denmark, what's currently Denmark, and they were the first of many Germanic invaders. Following the Jutes came the Angles and the Saxons. Britons were no match for the invaders, but they did not retreat to the mountains and the moors without a struggle. The legendary King Arthur may have been the leader of the Celtic people who were driven into Wales. These Germanic tribes brought with them a common language, the ancestor of our present-day English called Old English or Anglo-Saxon. Together they created the Anglo-Saxon England, that lasted until 1066 when the Normans, led by William, Duke of Normandy, successfully invaded and conquered the country. So this invasion with the Normans were the French from that part of France. And that changed a lot when the French invaded. During the Anglo-Saxon period, England was not the unified country that it is today. Most of this time, the land was divided into separate kingdoms, the most important of which were Kent, Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. During the last 2 centuries of this period, Anglo-Saxons were compelled to organize themselves to resist further invasions from the Vikings, or Norsemen, whom they called Danes. King Alfred of Wessex, 871 to 899, was able to unite his people and force the Danes to the northeast part of England. Anglo-Saxon England was born in warfare, remained an essentially military society, and came to an end in 1066 because of the superior strategy of another military power, the Normans. So it's interesting that they were able to unite under a king, which made them strong, and of course made it so that they were able to be taken over entirely by another country. But it's one of the reasons that England remains a country today, is because it was able to unite at some point. And then we have this timeline, and they made it zigzag because it didn't fit on the paper as one straight timeline, right? Way back in 449, we have a picture of King Arthur, and we know the stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and some Celtic crosses, all right, because Christianity had come over to the country. And this old historian writer, the Venerable Bede, we have the Christians coming over with Augustine, and we have the Danish invading, and then we have some writing going on, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in 892. So the church clerics were writing down histories. And of course, nobody had a photocopier or books. They were all handwritten until finally the French, the Normans, attack in 1066 and take over. Here's a picture of the islands. The part you cannot see over to the right would be Europe, okay, where the tribes invaded from. The Germanic tribes came from Europe and attacked, came over in boats and took over. And of course, the Norse were up in what was now Scandinavia, and they came down and they attacked also. And then the French were over on the right a little bit lower, and they came over and they attacked and took over. All right, so you wrote some notes in your notes for that section. The next section will be Anglo-Saxon civilization. Although the Anglo-Saxons frequently fought with one another, they had a great deal in common. Besides a common language base, they shared a heroic ideal and set of traditional heroes. And we're going to be talking about the heroic ideal. All right, the heroic ideal certainly would be the warrior ideal. And what does it take to be a warrior back in those days? They admired men of outstanding courage, whatever tribe they came from, loyal to the leader in the tribe, and fierce personal valor. considered necessary for the survival of all. Persons of rank were received with grave courtesy, whatever their tribe or people. The ruler was supposed to be generous to those who were loyal, and the followers, in return to this generosity, were to remain loyal. Everyone was aware of the shortness of life and the passing away of all things. Everything was thought to be determined by an impersonal, irresistible fate. Therefore, all competed zealously for fame, the only thing that lasted. Okay, so the heroes were good fighters, they had courage, they had loyalty, they were good to the leaders, and they fought hard to try to make a name for themselves. Anglo-Saxon society was comparatively well developed, branching out from the family unit to the clan and the tribe and then to the kingdom. While Anglo-Saxons easily developed great loyalty to their chosen leaders, they had a natural tendency towards what we should call now a democratic habit of mind. That is, they liked to hold meetings in which people could openly express what they thought and felt. So they would actually be able to talk to their leaders. And the reason that they included this picture in here, this is a piece of jewelry, and it's very ornate, showing that even way back then the people were artistic. Although it is widely known that the Anglo-Saxons were hardy and brave, it is not generally realized that they had a highly developed feeling for beauty. They had a passion for fine ornament, and they produced many beautiful pieces such as brooches and bracelets of exquisite design and workmanship. They were in fact a more artistic and poetic people than their Norman conquerors, the French who came over, who were essentially soldiers and administrators. The Anglo-Saxons also had vigorous minds. They had men of great learning, such as the Venerable Bede. By the end of the period we are studying, learning in England was so admired on the continent that it was natural for European rulers to send to England for teachers. And of course, England is still known for a couple of its universities, Cambridge and Oxford. One aspect of Anglo-Saxon civilization that survives in our daily lives is the names of certain weekdays. The names of these days are derived from the names of old Anglo-Saxon gods. Tuesday from Tiw, the god of war; Wednesday from Woden, the chief Teutonic god; Thursday from Thor, the god of thunder; and Friday from Frigga, goddess of the home. Even many basic American traditions in law, conduct, outlook, language, and literature are a legacy from the Anglo-Saxons. So a lot of this stuff is left over, and we're going to actually be continuing to talk about how things are left over from history that still exist today, just like we did with the last unit when we were talking about the medieval ideas. So you wrote some notes in that category on your note sheet. The next category will be the establishment of Christianity. Christianity came early to Britain AD 314. A bishop of London attended the church council at Arles in France. The spread of Christianity was strengthened by missionaries from the continent. The most famous of these, St. Augustine, came in 597 and established a monastery at Canterbury, which we will come back to later if we have time. He became the first Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishops of Canterbury came to be regarded as the primates of England, or the highest ecclesiastical authority. So they were the church leaders in the country. So when Christianity came to England, along with it came the organization of the church, because the church was organized by the popes, and they had a hierarchy and organization that they brought with them. In 664, there was a synod at Whitby Abbey, a famous monastery for men and women under the leadership of the Abbess Hilda. She was also a spiritual director of the pious Cadman, the first English religious poet, whose life by Bede is included in this unit. We may read that. This synod united the English church with the Roman Christianity. The church began to draw the island kingdoms together and encouraged ties, intellectual and commercial, with the rest of Europe. So the church ended up being a way that they would unite all of the countries and all of the people. And of course, we know this shape. The shape of the cross is also the shape of a church. In a church, they have the main altar, and then they have the side rooms and the back rooms and the main aisle shaped like a cross. Okay, the next section. So you wrote your notes down for that section. Next section is Anglo-Saxon literature. And this is a quote from a piece of Anglo-Saxon literature. And sometimes a proud old soldier who had heard the songs of the ancient heroes and who could sing them all through, story after story, would weave a net of words for Beowulf's victory, tying the knot of his verses smoothly, swiftly into place with a poet's quick skill, singing his new song aloud while he shaped it. This is how the Beowulf poet describes the singing of songs during his day. In fact, what is described in these lines is probably very similar to the circumstances under which the poem was originally composed. Anglo-Saxon poetry was an oral art, okay? Because, of course, when you think about it, they did not have books. In fact, if they did have books, most of them probably couldn't read. So all the stories were told or sung. And so when we get to reading Beowulf, it's a story that we have to imagine was told out loud rather than read. Poems were not written down until a much later period. Poems were sung, frequently to the accompaniment of a harp. Poets recited well-known poems from memory at times and created new ones. The professional poet, or scop, had a very important function in this society. He was the memory and the historian of the tribe. It was he who remembered the important heroes, the kings, the important battles, and the folklore of the tribe. The oral nature of the poetry probably necessitated a strong beat and alliteration. These poetic devices not only aided the memory, they were the necessary raw materials for free invention. New songs, such as the one that the soldier sings in the passage above, were made out of old matter. The most important traditions of Anglo-Saxon poetry were the heroic tradition and the elegiac tradition, which mourns the passing of earlier or better times. Okay, so we have the heroic following hero, and the elegiac, which is mourning the good old days. Unto these traditions were grafted Christian beliefs which gradually replaced pagan ones. Okay, and remember, before Christianity, the people believed in multiple gods. They had what they called pagan gods, and when the Christians came, they pushed the pagan gods out of the way and required people to believe in the Christian God. Of the 30,000 lines of Anglo-Saxon poetry that remain to us, the most important single poem is the epic Beowulf. Of the great elegiac lyrics, the personal dramatic Seafarer is a good example. It may be that the poems to have survived are the ones that appealed to the monks who finally committed them to writing. There are, however, some light and witty riddles in the early manuscript that may call this theory to question. To the Anglo-Saxon, the riddle was an intellectual exercise. What do you think is the subject of this one? And by the way, I'll give you a little hint before we start. It's honey. Okay. I'm prized by men, in the meadows I'm found, gathered on hillsides and hunted in groves, from dale and from dawn. By day I am brought, airy wings carry me, cunningly store me, hoarding me safe. Yet soon men take me, drained into vats. I'm dangerous grown. I tie up my victim and trip him and throw him. Often I floor a foolish old churl who wrestles with me and rashly would measure his strength against mine, will straightway find himself flung to the ground flat on his back, unless he leaves his folly in time, put away from his senses and power of speech, robbed of his might, bereft of his mind, of his hands and his feet. And now find me my name, who can bind and enslave men so upon earth, and bring fools low in broad daylight. So a little chemistry fact, apparently adding sugar to things works as a preservative. So if you add honey to a fermented drink, the honey and the sugar and the alcohol will all turn it into a drink that will last over time, will be preserved. And so that's why people were creating alcoholic drinks way back in the day, is to preserve, fruits and grains and things like that. And of course, what happens is the alcohol then ends up getting you drunk. So you have to be careful how much you drink. And that's what happens. This honey turns into alcohol. The churchmen who wrote verse generally wrote in Latin, though occasionally they included lines in English. It was from their imitation of church hymns in Latin that the gradual introduction of rhyme into English verse developed. The earlier prose writers and chroniclers among the Anglo-Saxon churchmen also wrote in Latin. The greatest of these was known as the Venerable Bede, 673 to 735, the most learned and industrious writer of the whole period, and the author of A History of the English Church and People, 731, an excellent historical authority of its time. As a historian, Bede is rightly regarded as the father of English history. Nearly 2 centuries later, Alfred the Great, the ablest and most remarkable of all English kings, not only became the patron of all scholars and educators, but also turned author and translator himself after delivering his kingdom from the Danes. Anglo-Saxon prose and history owe most to his influence and to example. Rather than use Latin, as had been the custom, Alfred promoted the use of written English and was responsible for the initiation of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the first historical record to be kept in English. So apparently what happened is when the church took over, the people of the church would write in Roman, Latin, and so most of the writing that was going on was in Latin. But eventually, written English began to be introduced, and Alfred promoted the use of written English. The briefest study of Alfred's reign makes nonsense of any idea of the Anglo-Saxons as drunken oafs existing in a dark age. Alfred maintained diplomatic relations with all neighboring kings and princes, sent frequent ambassadors to Rome, corresponded with the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and may even, as we are told, have sent a mission as far as India. He also formulated a code of law and founded the first English public schools. A truly great man, Alfred did much to educate a society that, with its social organization and laws, its letters and arts, was far from being barbarous, but indeed made an enduring contribution to our civilization. And that is one of the things that we are looking for, is hints of these old civilizations still existing today. So that's it. That's the reading for today. You make your notes on your note sheet and turn that in. I'm going to pause the reading. Pause the recording. Do I have any questions?